The ocean has swallowed thousands of ships throughout history, but very few have returned with a mystery this terrifying. Because when the MV Joyita was finally discovered drifting alone in the Pacific Ocean, the ship was still alive. The engine was running. The supplies were still inside. The crew's belongings were untouched. But every single person who had been on board was gone. On October 3rd, 1955, the MV Joyita left Samoa carrying 25 people. The ship was not a massive ocean liner. It was a small commercial vessel used for transporting passengers, cargo, and supplies between islands in the South Pacific. Among those on board were crew members, passengers, a doctor, a government official, and even a young child. The journey was supposed to be routine. The destination was the Tokelau Islands. The trip should have taken only a few days, but the Joyita never arrived. At first, nobody was immediately alarmed. Ships experienced delays, weather changed, mechanical problems happened. But as the days passed, the silence became impossible to ignore. The families waiting for the passengers began asking questions. Where was the ship? Why hadn't anyone contacted them? Why was there no emergency signal? A search operation began. Planes scanned the ocean. Ships searched thousands of miles of open water, but nothing was found. The MV Joyita had disappeared. Then, 5 weeks later, a merchant ship spotted something unusual. A vessel, drifting alone in the ocean. At first they thought they had found a wreck, but as they approached, they realized something impossible. It was the Joyita. The ship wasn't destroyed. It wasn't underwater. It was simply floating, waiting. When rescuers boarded the ship, they expected to find evidence of a disaster. Instead, they found something much stranger. The engine was still working. Food was still on board. Clothing was still inside cabins. Personal possessions were untouched. It looked like everyone had simply left for a few minutes and never came back. But the questions started immediately. Why would 25 people abandon a ship that was still floating? The Joyita was known as an extremely difficult ship to sink. It had been designed with extra flotation, meaning even if part of the vessel flooded, it should have remained above water. So why leave? Investigators found clues. The ship had taken on water. The radio was damaged. The lifeboats were missing. Medical supplies were discovered scattered around the ship. But none of these explained what happened. There was no confirmed distress call, no bodies, no survivors, no final message. Just an empty ship, drifting through the Pacific. Over the years, dozens of theories appeared. Some believed the passengers panicked after thinking the ship was sinking. Others believed the crew encountered criminals or pirates. Some suggested the ship was involved in illegal activity, but no theory has ever been proven. The ocean gave no answers. The 25 people who disappeared from the MV Joyita were never found, and the ship itself became something almost impossible to understand. A ghost ship, a vessel that survived, while the people inside vanished. Even today, one question remains. What happened during those final moments on the MV Joyita that made everyone on board abandon a ship that was still floating? Because whatever happened out there in the Pacific Ocean was enough to make 25 people leave everything behind and step into the unknown. There are storms that ships survive, and then there are storms that become legends. On November 10th, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald entered Lake Superior, carrying 26,000 tons of iron ore. The crew had no idea they were about to become part of one of the most haunting mysteries in maritime history, because hours later, the largest ship on the Great Lakes would disappear beneath the waves, and not a single person on board would survive. The Edmund Fitzgerald was not an ordinary ship. At 729 feet long, it was one of the largest and most powerful freighters ever built for the Great Lakes. To sailors, it was known as a reliable ship, a ship that could handle difficult conditions, a ship that had completed hundreds of successful voyages. On November 9th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald departed from Superior, Wisconsin. Its destination was Detroit, Michigan. The cargo was heavy iron ore pellets. The crew consisted of 29 men. Many of them were experienced sailors who had spent years navigating the dangerous waters of Lake Superior. Nobody expected this voyage to be different, but the weather reports were changing. A massive storm system was moving across the lake. Winds increased, the waves became violent, and Lake Superior began showing why sailors have always respected it. The lake is enormous, so large that it can create ocean-like conditions. Waves can reach heights capable of overwhelming even large vessels. The storm was growing stronger, but the Edmund Fitzgerald continued forward. As the storm intensified, another ship nearby, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, was traveling through the same dangerous waters. The two ships communicated throughout the day. The Fitzgerald reported increasing difficulties. The crew noticed problems. The ship had taken on water. Some equipment had been damaged, but the captain remained confident. They continued through the storm. At around 7:10 p.m. that evening, the Arthur M. Anderson contacted the Fitzgerald. The message was simple. They asked how the ship was handling the worsening conditions. The reply came back, "We are holding our own." Those would become the final confirmed words ever heard from the Edmund Fitzgerald. Minutes later, everything went silent. No distress call, no emergency signal, no final warning. The ship simply disappeared. When the Arthur M. Anderson realized something was wrong, they attempted to contact the Fitzgerald. No response. They searched the darkness. They scanned the waves. They looked for lights, anything, but there was nothing. The storm was too powerful. Visibility was almost impossible. The ship had vanished. A massive freighter, 729 feet long, gone. The search began immediately. Aircraft searched the area. Ships moved through the storm looking for survivors, but they found almost nothing. No lifeboats, no survivors, no floating debris. The only evidence came months later when underwater explorers discovered the wreck resting at the bottom of Lake Superior. The Edmund Fitzgerald had broken apart and sunk nearly 530 feet underwater. All 29 crew members were lost. Their bodies were never recovered. To this day, nobody knows the exact reason the ship sank. Several theories exist. Some believe the ship was overwhelmed by massive waves. Others believe the cargo shifted or the ship suffered structural damage. Another theory suggests the ship was damaged by waves that caused flooding. But one question still bothers investigators. How did such a massive ship disappear so quickly, without even enough time for a distress call? Years later, divers explored the wreck. The ship rests silently beneath the cold waters of Lake Superior, a reminder of the 29 men who left port that day, expecting another routine journey. Instead, they became part of one of the greatest maritime mysteries ever recorded. The Edmund Fitzgerald wasn't lost because people forgot about it. It was lost because the ocean created conditions no one could overcome. And somewhere beneath those dark waters, the final moments of the ship and its crew remain frozen in time. The most terrifying abandoned ships aren't the ones that are destroyed. They're the ones that look like everyone simply disappeared. Because when rescuers boarded the Kaz II, they didn't find a wreck. They didn't find evidence of a struggle. They found a boat that looked like the owners had stepped away for a moment and never returned. The engine was still working. The computers were still on. Food was still sitting out. But the 3 men who had been sailing the yacht were gone. In April 2007, 3 experienced sailors began a journey along the coast of Queensland, Australia. Their names were Peter Warner, his brother John, and their friend James Tunstead. They were not inexperienced travelers. They understood sailing. They understood the ocean. The yacht they were using was called the Kaz II. It was a 30-foot catamaran designed for coastal travel. Their plan was simple: sail from Airlie Beach toward Western Australia. It was supposed to be a peaceful journey, a normal sailing trip. But something happened out on the water that nobody has ever been able to fully explain. On April 18th, the Kaz II was spotted drifting through the ocean. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The yacht was still moving. The sails were up. It appeared to be another boat, traveling along the coast. But when authorities tried contacting the crew, nobody answered. That was when they became concerned. A rescue operation was launched. When rescuers finally reached the Kaz II, they expected to find people in danger. maybe injured, maybe waiting for help. Instead, they found something much stranger. The boat was completely abandoned, but everything was still there. The engine was running. The navigation equipment was working. Personal belongings were untouched. There was food on the table. A computer was still on board. The men's wallets and passports were still inside. Nothing had been taken. Nothing appeared damaged. It was as if the three sailors had simply vanished in the middle of a normal day. Investigators immediately searched for clues. The first question was obvious. Why would three experienced sailors abandon a perfectly functioning yacht? The answer wasn't clear. The life raft was missing. But there was no evidence showing exactly why it had been used. The weather conditions were not considered extreme. There was no major storm, no signs of a collision, no distress signal, no message, no explanation. The ocean had simply taken three people. Then investigators discovered something even more unsettling. The yacht had security cameras on board, and those cameras captured the final known moments of the three sailors. The footage showed the men acting normally. Nothing appeared wrong. They moved around the boat. They went about their day. Then, suddenly, one of the men moved toward the back of the yacht. The others followed, and after that, they were never seen again. The cameras continued recording. The boat continued moving, but the people who owned it were gone. The most accepted theory is that one of the men accidentally fell overboard. The others may have jumped in to help. A sudden wave or strong current could have separated them from the yacht, and once the boat continued drifting away, there may have been no way back. But even that explanation leaves questions. Why didn't anyone call for help? Why were there no emergency signals? Why did three experienced sailors disappear so quickly? The Kaz II was eventually recovered. The yacht returned to land. But the mystery surrounding what happened on that day remains. Because the most frightening part isn't that the men disappeared. The ocean has always taken people. The frightening part is how normal everything looked afterward. The boat was still alive. The journey was still continuing. The only thing missing were the people who started it. Even today, the Kaz II remains known as one of Australia's strangest maritime mysteries. A ghost yacht, a boat that sailed on without its crew, and a reminder that sometimes the ocean doesn't leave behind destruction. Sometimes it leaves behind questions.